All right, so to get started, what I want to do is I want to give you a couple of minutes just to talk about yourself and give an introduction as to who you are and uh, let everyone know.
Awesome. Now, first of all, I appreciate the opportunity to come on here and you hosted me this afternoon. So my name is Ernest Bailes. I'm born and raised right here in Shepherd, Texas. I live here with my wife, Courtney, who is a school teacher right here in Cold Spring. Our two boys, Cinco and Rigby, 12 and 15. Born on a dairy and a beef cattle operation. We still run beef cattle here. I have a somewhat of a specialized niche business that does whitetail reproduction work. So it affords me to make a very good living in a short period of time so that I can be available and serve in the legislature and just be at home when I need to be at home, with the exception of that really, really tight 6 to 8 week window. So I built it up. We cover 7 states, but then once I ran for office the first time, we ran it back into where we just do one. But it's been a really good part of the process. We don't have enough working class guys up there that understand that payroll comes on Friday regardless. We've got a lot of attorneys and a lot of guys with institutional knowledge, but not often enough just real practical, real world knowledge. And that's one thing. It's been a blessing to be able to kind of help bridge that gap. So yeah, it's been a really good opportunity. I've served for the last 6 years with House District 18, which covered Liberty, San Jacinto, and Walker County. After redistricting, House District 18 has shifted some. So I lost Walker County, and now it's going to include East Montgomery County, about 4% of the county, but it's 28,000, and all of Hardin County. So we've been working really hard just to be present and meet everybody we can and just see what best we need to know so we can do a great job representing the new parts of the district come next session.
Well, welcome to East Montgomery County, firstly. So the majority of your district is really in rural areas, and
Yes.
with that comes infrastructure. So what are your plans? What have you done, and what are your plans going forward to help improve infrastructure? And that's energy, water, and mobility in your area. And what needs have you found that are new?
You know, it's I mean, we're one of the fastest growing areas of the state. I know I was already put on one of the regional mobility planning committees right there in East Montgomery County, and I was glad to be asked to join those meetings and to sit in on that so we can go and hit the ground running and be able to help. I think over the next 10 years, the statement was made that the 3 fastest growing school districts would either be New Caney, Splendora, or Cleveland. And they're all part of House District 18, which is still one of the rural areas. So it's kind of interesting to see that you have one of the still somewhat rural districts and has 3 of the fastest growing schools in the state. So transportation is just a big part. I mean, with 59, the I-69 corridor, I've been working extensively with TxDOT on this process to make sure that we have adequate traffic studies to know what's coming, know what our bottlenecks are to be able to address those, working with our commissioners. They're a big part of that equation. And then also with our engineers, because I actually had the opportunity last week to meet with our Beaumont district engineer and our Liberty County area engineer to cover projects for Liberty and with Hardin County, and have already been working a lot with our engineers out of Lufkin, which covers San Jacinto County, and have started those conversations working with our TxDOT engineers that cover the Houston office. So it's not a simple aspect where you've got 3 different district offices. So with my old district, it's when you have someone working for you and they have a relationship with an engineer and they have someone that calls and has a question, you first of all have to know where they live, because Shepherd and San Jacinto County is out of the Lufkin office, Liberty County is out of the Beaumont office, and Walker County was out of the College Station office. So those are just some of the things some of the roadblocks that you have to overcome, especially when you're new, to find out and learn how best to navigate the whole system. Electricity has been a huge issue. We have a lot of our growing developments. I work a ton with Entergy. They service one of our fastest growing areas, which is Plum Grove, and just to get transmission lines to redo the line so they can carry a broader capacity. We have some of our areas which are getting a very dense population, but they don't have availability of natural gas. So when you have an event like Winter Storm Uri and things go off, whenever electricity comes back on, all of those electric heaters kick back on at the same time. So that's an issue. Just that additional surge is not something that all areas have to deal with. So if you have gas appliances and you have gas heat, that initial surge isn't as large. So we worked a lot during the last legislature for our gas and our electrical system to make sure that we have addressed issues there. I was on conference calls every day during the winter storm events, most of the time twice a day, and just working on seeing how best we can be a conduit to take the concerns from folks within the district, get those to the people who can actually help, and then to make sure that we safeguarded our operations. I mean, it's something as simple in Conroe, which serves East Montgomery County, and that's a big part of this area. They have their fresh air inlets, essentially, not to oversimplify, but they have a screen because it's like a big turbine. So you visualize a jet engine. You don't want a bird or something going in the jet engine. That's not good. So you have a screen over that. And then when you have a very unique scenario with the weather where you have wispy snowflakes and then you have rain and then you have wispy snowflakes again, it essentially cuts off and clogs the whole inlet and it shuts everything down. So one thing that we had in the state of Texas is by not having all of our compressor stations listed as part of critical infrastructure, it got down to where we needed to shed loads. So they shed for all aspects that weren't critical infrastructure. We shut down a lot of our compressor stations. Those compressor stations feed our power plants. And by the time they realized that the power plants were running out of gas, the valves had already frozen. They couldn't get the compressor stations back online. It seems 100% clear looking back, hindsight's 2020, but it was minor things that should have never been allowed to happen. They did happen. So we just had to make sure from a legislative standpoint, we address those so that those don't happen again. So we've got a lot of growth. There's a lot of things we're having to look at. Education is one of our biggest things. Just to make sure that we equip our local schools to be able to take care of our kids and educate them as good as they possibly can, because our kids deserve that regardless of what the growth is in the area.
Well, speaking on education, a lot of some of the bigger issues, it's with the quality of the education as well. So over the pandemic, there was a loss of time, a loss of learning for a lot of students, but parents have also expressed concerns about what is being taught in schools, such as CRT. So what are you going to do to help give parental choice regarding curriculum and ensure a balanced curriculum within schools?
I want to go back to your first point on with what happened during COVID, and I think that really drove home the need for the availability of high-speed internet in this area. There's a lot of holes that it's difficult for a kid to be able to log on and do things virtual without access to good high-speed internet. In our rural areas, that was one of the hardest things that to overcome. And then also from the fact that we have teachers that are some of the best teachers that you can find. They're in the classroom, they're working with the kids, they can see that aha moment when they finally catch on, they can see that twinkle in the kid's eye. And when you're having to do that all virtual, you lose that touch and you lose that interaction. So I think a lot of that, it's no different than you hire someone in sales where they're face-to-face sales or they're a telemarketer on the phone. I mean, we put our teachers in that impossible situation where they were best trained and best equipped to teach one-on-one. And we took that ability away from them during COVID. So those are some of the hurdles that we had to deal with. As far as supporting our public education system and supporting our teachers so that we can put together strong curriculums which really take care of our kids and make sure that they learn how to be successful in life. They learn the valuable life skills. They learn how to be productive citizens. I think a lot of times we let political motives cloud the classroom, and I think that's a problem. It's we don't often enough support our teachers and just let them teach, and it's all about local control, and that's a cliche thing to say, because here's the problem: we need to allocate more resources to better equip our schools and our teachers to be able to deal with the additional mandates that were placed on them in something like COVID or in a pandemic. And with all the rules and regulations that we put in place, we've got to be sure that with every rule we put in place, we put funding to be able to handle that and cover that, so it doesn't take away from other parts of that education. But the flip side of the coin, to not tie everything in red tape on exactly what those monies have to be spent with. Because when you do the one size fits all, I was just in, oh, did I lose you? Sorry about that.
Sorry.
Now, I was just over in Honey Island, had lunch at the Honey Island General Store, and you've got Coombs, and then you've got Hard Jefferson, a lot of the schools over there. And then you have Shepherd, and then you go down to Splendor and New Caney. Those school districts are all very different. And it's impossible for us as a state to put one size fits all strings attached to that funding, because there's our local school boards and our teachers and administration are going to know best what they need to do to take care of their kids. So it's and then you look at local control, your things like CRT. It's we have an issue that has to be addressed to make sure that we are not clouding education with politics. However, with some of the legislation to correct that, we go so far to limit the ability for the teachers to truly teach. And that's one thing that I'm always very mindful of, to make sure that we have that happy medium. We take care of our kids. We don't brainwash them with a progressive social ideology, but the flip side of that coin, we allow the teacher to be able to teach those kids how they know best, just under the guidance of the school district, because and the school board, because that's one thing that I don't feel we as a state should do, is take away that local control. And a lot of times in legislation, that's what we unfortunately do.
Now, staying on education funding, the biggest portion of an average person's property tax bill comes from school districts. So what can you do at the legislative and state level to help ease the burden on taxpayers while also providing the same level of funding to schools so they can provide a quality education?
That's a simple question with no great answer, but I'm going to break through how best to address that and what I've been working on personally up there the whole time that I've been. It's interesting, as we've dealt a lot with charter schools. We've had a lot of charter schools that have came to move into this area, predominantly Liberty County, to be able to handle a lot of the growth. And that was under the directive of TEA. Commissioner Morath had actually advised that that was the best way to help a fast growing school district. With that, charter school funding is received 100% from the state. There's zero local contribution. They also take the statewide average plus maximum adjustment. So in Cleveland ISD, if a charter school puts their campus right next door, they would receive more per kid in order to educate those kids than the public school would, without near the strings attached. The ability, they don't have to provide transportation. They don't have to provide counseling. They don't have to provide special education services. They don't have to address any of the behavior issues. And where the inequality is, if that is a better system, why aren't we doing that in our public school? If we can afford to fund our school kids that are in charter schools 100% state contribution, as the system was designed to do, we should also be able to do the same with our public school kids. But it brings up the question, where's that money come from? So I hear time and time again as I'm working with guys, they say, you know what, if I have a really good year and I'm making good money, I don't mind paying my fair share. I don't mind paying more. If I have a really tough time or business slows down, I don't want to have to pay as much. And then when I retire and I'm not working, I question whether I need to be paying for taxes, especially on the education side when my kids are out of the system. So what that is a tax that's tied to your income. But the state of Texas overwhelmingly said in a constitutional amendment that we don't want a state income tax. So then we have to look at what other options there are. So you have the ad valorem property taxes, which has been the main bearer of the burden. And then you have sales tax. So right where I sit here in my house, directly across the road, they put in several pipelines. And the complicating factor is not a single piece of that 20-inch pipe came from Shepherd to Cold Spring School District. We don't have a single supplier of red off-road diesel, and we don't have a single Caterpillar distributor that sells equipment here or any other consumables. So if we have that strictly based on local, none of that money actually comes to support the kids here. So my wife, Courtney, who's a school teacher, she goes to an HEB or a Walmart for groceries. We don't have a single HEB or Walmart in the county, let alone in a Shepherd School District or in a Cold Spring School District. So we would have to institute that on a statewide level. So the statewide level, it's our rural areas. So I represent 3 full counties and a piece of another. Montgomery County has 3 full reps, and then myself. And then Harris County has a ton of representatives. Who do you think is going to have the loudest voice to be able to bring those tax dollars back into their local districts and economies? Our rural areas are going to be treated the poorest. So that's the problem. So how do we find an equitable system? We actually had legislation this last session to somewhat institute a hybrid to slowly start implementing a consumption tax and have that as a direct reduction to our property tax, which that's probably the best way to get that process started. We have to get away from the property tax system as it is, but that's the best start to that process. We had enough to pass that, but it was not enough votes to make that constitutionally binding. So that make that constitutionally binding, if the majority party lost control and another party came in to control in a session or two, which based on the demographics and changing of Texas, that is possible. They could then keep that increased consumption tax, go back and institute the full ad valorem property tax, and every person is hurt at that point in time. So it's just mindful of what's the unintended consequence of us not doing that right. The problem is more evaluations. And the problem is if you have a home here and you have a nice home, you shouldn't be penalized for building a nice home and taking care of your family. And then if you have no intentions of selling your home, but your 2 neighbors sell and they sell to someone from out of state, perhaps California, they have a very elevated home price over there, just for lack of better words, their properties are worth more where they came from. So they're willing to spend a lot more for a home here. Why should myself as a homeowner be penalized if I have no intention of selling my home? The problem is the actual growth with the valuation. It's not the tax rate. I'm a pretty simple guy, and it goes back to the aspect of I either write the same check for my taxes the next year, I write a bigger check, and I write a smaller check. And regardless of whether I'm being told that my taxes went down because the rate went down, if I write a bigger check, my taxes went up. So we're working really hard to try to transition away from the ad valorem property tax. We were able to put additional monies this year into public education funding, because the problem is when you have greater than a 5% variance on the valuation from the county standpoint, that increases if you or with outside of that 5% variance, then the state comptroller actually looks at that. Well, if locally you don't care to connect your own taxes to pay for your services, then why should we as a state? So they'll actually decrease the funding that they'll pay. So we've actually had legislation to A, increase the variance, and B, decrease the growth. And then again, we also had bills to completely eliminate it by a time certain and force the conversation in order to make that transition. So it's there's no easy answer, but we have to be able to take the burden off of our homeowners and our landowners, because they should not be the one bearing the brunt of a public education fund.
Um, while we are a rural area and your district is primarily rural, it is a lot of growth that is also ongoing in these areas. So how are you working with, how are and can you work with TxDOT to ensure, and the local leaders to ensure mobility needs are met, not just for right now, but for future growth?
By serving on the committees that I'm already on, having active conversations directly with, I've been very involved in our chambers. I think East Montgomery County Chamber did an absolutely awesome 411 presentation by bringing in the commissioner, bringing in TxDOT, bringing some of the other entities to talk about their plans, what their funding structures are, what their limitations are, and also what their project timelines are, to be actively aware of what those are and being able to sit side by side to ask, how can we help and how can we help eliminate roadblocks? So with huge developments, here's a problem. When a county has parameters put in place for development, and you have a developer that actually comes to commissioner's court to have a plat approved, they have to line out line by line what the restrictions are and what has to be met prior to approval. As long as all those things are met, commissioner's court is legally obligated to approve that. That's not always what is best for the county, but that's the way the system works. So as we've had some of this unprecedented growth, I've been working directly with the commissioner's court and with some of our Texas Association of Counties and with our engineers to kind of see how can we put local restrictions in place to mitigate our excessive growth, especially in scenarios when we don't have transportation and we don't have drainage and stuff first fully addressed. Because here's the deal with the new developments, they're following the letter of the law typically. But the problem is, what land is still raw land that's not been already developed? Typically it's a lower standing land which holds a lot of water. I know Plum Grove area, that was 100% issue. That city was incorporated in the 60s so that they could apply for federal grants to mitigate flooding. And that's in their initial charter. There's a 4,000 acre development that they're looking at in Lumberton, Texas right now. And that's the main concern with all of that is flooding. So that area has always flooded and it's always held water and it's had a slow release of that water. As a developer comes in and they do the plat and they put in the roads and they put in the ditches and everything, they do a good job of moving the water off of the properties in the development, but everyone downstream is hurt by that process because we're getting the same amount of rains as we had then. But if you have a 10,000 acre area which held water for years and it would hold that water for 24, 36 hours, even 4 to 5 days before all that water drained out, it was a slow release and it wasn't an absolute surge into all of the drainage basins, sloughs or canals, or into the rivers and creeks. That's been the problem. So what I've been working with is to work with our commissioners to help give them any tools that we can. I carried one of the municipal utility districts there in Plum Grove. That was, all of that had already been approved, and it was interesting that I carried one of those, and that was on an area that was wholly undeveloped prior to. The Commissioner's Court had already approved the plat. It was already going forward. So with that, we put restrictions that had never been placed on a MUD in order to safeguard the residents that were already there and the community as best we could. Because if I did not carry that, within 6 months, TCEQ could have granted that same authority. So we put, prior to the issuance of any bonds, file and conveyance of lands for a school site and a first responders complex must be conveyed. And we actually had the meets and bounds of that surveys in that MUD. We put the board members, because typically a developer can name all 5 of their board members initially. We had 2 of those were to be named by the county. 2 of those be named by the school district and only 1 by the developer. That's far better than the 5 that were initially proposed, and not a single one of those 5 actually lived within the county. And then also we had minimal building restrictions. When you have areas that are outside of an ETJ and outside of a city, there have never been building restrictions put in place on those. We were able to work with attorneys to at least put minimum building restrictions that went outside of what they call the common template. And that was stopped at the House level in the committee and by the speaker. I had to sit down directly with the lieutenant governor's office and directly with the governor's office and explain to them why we were doing this, because it set a precedence of doing something which was outside of the standard template, but it was for the right reasons to help the area. So the problem is we could not go back and retroactively do that on anything that was already developed. That was our bigger issue. And so we're trying to work now to help put rules and regulations in place and give tools to the commissioners so that they can do that without having to do that legislatively. So it's, we're going to get a lot of growth. So we just need to find out how best we can make it positive.
Mm-hmm. And with a growth in population, there also comes a certain level of growth in crime. How are you going to work with local law enforcement to make sure that they are able to meet their needs to provide the level of safety and security that they need to?
You know, I think East Montgomery County, you guys have an awesome constable there with Rowdy. He's very unique. I've been able to serve with a lot of constables, and that department is unlike anything that I've ever worked with. It's I think you guys have a true asset there, and he was one of the first conversations and people that I went and sat down with directly for us to have that relationship, and so that he would ask if there's anything that I can do, and so that legislatively, as we go through and have legislation that is either passing or being discussed, that I get his input. I was with Sheriff Rand Henderson just 2 nights ago over there in Montgomery County, texting back and forth the next morning on personal cell phones. That way he knows how to get a hold of me. I know how to get a hold of him. And I've always 100% been supporting our law enforcement. It's this is my home. I've been here my whole life. It goes back. My wife's great-great-grandfather was sheriff here in 1880, and my great-great-grandfather was in 1900. So it's this is definitely home. I will do anything and everything I can to support, and our law enforcement are a huge part of our community, and their success is our community's success.
Now, I want to take a moment to discuss the pandemic response. Some people called that the legislators should have been brought in after it was seen that this was going to be going on for a period of time to help make decisions on behalf of the state of Texas. Would you have supported that?
100%. I was very active part of that conversation. It was I don't envy the position that Governor Abbott was put in. I don't know that I could have done anything better. So it's always mindful of I'm quick to put myself in that person's scenario before I start throwing rocks. It was tough on everybody. I mean, there was no great answer. There was no great way to handle that. However, I do feel it was important that we had 150 members of the Texas House that cover every corner of the state of Texas. And I think that their input and their voice would have been very important to make sure that all parts of Texas were represented and equally taken care of. And it was a tough scenario when we would get, as a member of the legislature, would get a text or an email about an upcoming conference call with the governor. And that was only directly followed by the press conference with press. So he told everyone in the state of Texas what he was doing. And then we were brought in on the call to explain why he did that. So I would like for that to have been handled different. I mean, I really think that we should have been part of that conversation, but I think we were able to address legislation to keep that from happening again. That went back to the emergency powers of the executive office back, I think, in the 70s, and they had never been utilized to that effect. So there was never a good reason to completely change and overhaul that particular part of statute. But because of this, we we opened that up, we were able to get that addressed. And I think that's important so that here moving forward, your elected representatives are an active part of that equation.
Now to an issue that's a little more local. It's in San Jacinto County, the Peach Creek landfill that is being attempted to be put in. What work have you done to prevent that? And what's the latest in there?
You know what, I sat down with the landowner, his engineer, and their attorney at the very onset after they've been having conversations with the commissioner. And I was very respectful. I wanted to listen, see what the plans were. And I told them every concern that I had. First of all was the environmental, because it's proximity to a 100-year flood plan, which it was right there on the outskirts of some of that actual properties in that 100-year flood plan. Proximity to the national forest. As we started going forward with this, Wood Duck Farm has been very, very front and center on conveying their concerns and their plight. And Mr. Van Welden, we have sat together several times and discussed what his concerns are and anything that I can do to help make sure those are adequately addressed. I was the one that requested for that first hearing. I was actually part of that hearing. I spoke on the onset of that and listened to every person that testified there. We had several follow-ups with the people that had questions that regarded my office, or just made sure that they knew how to get a hold of me. And then as we went forward with this process even more, my office was the one, and me personally, that made the request for the second hearing. We cited the need for additional public comment to extend that, and also to address some of the concerns which have been brought up. And my office was the one who received that first, that we were granted an additional hearing so that we can have all that addressed. It's a necessary part of our life. I mean, you produce refuse, it has to go somewhere, but we just need to be mindful that it's going in the right place, in the safest place. And my question is, with that particular tract of land, it's very close to a lot of development. A lot more development is going to come. It's surrounded by the national forest, and it's a direct runoff into San Jacinto River, Lake Houston, right there in the Conroe watershed. That's not the best place for that to be. So it's a tough fight to hold with TCEQ and with the developers and everything. But I mean, we point blank said, I mean, my question was traffic, roads, and then also access. And then I brought up in the initial conversation, I was like, first of all, have you spoke to all the adjacent landowners? And they had not at that point in time. Asked them how familiar they were with the road and what the rating of the roads and the capacity currently was, because it was pretty piss poor, for lack of better words. Those are some tough roads. And when you start throwing loaded garbage trucks on those during rainy seasons like we've had here lately, they would be, I mean, absolutely obliterated. And it's not best to have all those garbage trucks going through in front of residents. And ask them if they had the conversation with the regional forester, that if they do plan on going forward with this, what has been their conversation to do a land swap so they get an additional ingress and egress so that they can move this traffic elsewhere. Because a lot of these people live in this area to get away from developments. And it's not fair to them to start running a ton of garbage trucks right there in front of their homes, when you shouldn't have those garbage trucks on a residential road anyways. So it's we worked extensively with that just to make sure that everyone is heard. It's a valid points. Van Welden brought up a very valid point on actual testing of this produce and the particular matter which could be aerosolized from the trucks that's going through. And because of the size of his operation and the increased testing, that would actually shut down his operation. There's no reason to shut down someone's livelihood unless all due diligence is taken to make sure there are no other options. And I don't feel that the people have had an adequate opportunity to voice all of their concerns, so that we know that we vetted this through and through, and that is the best possible option, because personally, I don't think it is.
Is there anything else you would like people to know about you, your campaign, or the office?
You know what? I'm a working class guy. My life is not politics. It never has been, never was. I still don't like being called a politician because that's not who I am. You have a lot of people that they live their life for politics, and that identifies who they are. I would like to think I'm the same guy that I've always been, just working class. One cool thing about, I got to be the grand marshal of the parade there at Christmas on the Square last year, and standing on the back of an old flatbed pickup, one of my work trucks. My wife was back there with me, and I was nothing more than Miss Bailes' husband. She does car rider duty and opens every car door in the morning and evening, and there is no better title than to be Miss Bailes' husband. So that I'm quite fine with that. But no, I just want folks to know that if they ever have a concern, to reach out. Let me know if there's anything I can do to help. I'm a very reasonable guy. If you'll help me understand what the issues are, I promise we can do something to help. So we're working hard. We're not going to take anything for granted, and just always want you to know that that we'll put in the extra time. So bailesfortexas.com is the website. Also on Facebook. If you have anything or any questions, don't hesitate to ever reach out. And I look forward to representing you guys in East Montgomery County. One last thing I want to point out. I know for a long time, East Montgomery County was in a unique situation where you always felt like you were playing second fiddle to Conroe proper. And I think that's diplomatically enough said. But with the new district, I'm in San Jacinto County. We're a little over 27,000. You guys are about 28,000. So there is nothing second fiddle about East Montgomery County. You guys are a huge part of this equation. And I look forward to the opportunity to represent you guys.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bailes, for your time today.
All right. Have a good one. Thanks again.